Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Leverage Your Podcast show. And today we're going to talk about networks or collectives or whatever you call them. And I think there's a lot of confusion out there, including me, of what they really are and how they can help you as a podcaster. And I've chatted with the amazing Becky Mollenkamp before and spoken to your group, which I absolutely loved and love your energy. So I'm excited to have this conversation today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about it too.
Awesome. So let's start with Becky, what is a collective? What is a podcast network? Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there.
And I think there are different variations or versions
That's
of this,
true.
which is also probably why there's confusion. And so I can talk a little bit about what mine is like, but there are the ones that we all have heard of, the Wonderies and the Liminadas and these larger networks of podcasts. Most of those are geared towards advertising, right? So it's sort of,
Mhm.
can we bring this collective power together of all of our shows to increase the total audience reach of our shows combined so that we have more appeal to advertisers to say you can advertise across our shows so you're getting greater reach by all working together. And then I don't know how all of them work out the financial situation, but there's probably some variation on a split of revenue from
Right.
ads based on probably your show size and that sort of thing. And there are organizations that are always trying to get these bigger name shows into their collective so they can have these enormous numbers of podcast downloads. That's sort of that traditional model that I think is largely geared around
Yeah.
money. There are other reasons to join those as well, because also I would assume, at least in most of those, there is some degree of information sharing, resource sharing, networking opportunities, which are
True.
all really powerful things for being able to increase your audience and where
Mhm.
you're going. And another thing that a lot of those shows do, in addition to advertising, and you've probably heard this if you listen to, as an example, a Wondery podcast, you're likely to hear at the beginning or somewhere in a mid-roll or something an advertisement for another Wondery show, right? It's going to be, hey, Wondery's launching this new show. If you love this show, you'll probably like this too. Or they'll plop the trailer into all of their collective shows so that they're increasing the chances of that show getting that initial impact, that initial reach by being in front of a lot of audiences. So those are some of the things that happen inside of a network. Ours is a little different because it's not geared towards advertising, at least not yet.
Oh,
So
okay.
that is not a piece that we're exploring at the moment. But we do have this idea of how do we sort of use that model to the advantage of people who have smaller shows, small independent podcasters, because those organizations are great. But I'm not getting invited anytime soon, more than likely, into Wondery because those are shows that have, millions or at least tens of thousands of downloads. And I'm not there.
Mhm.
Most of
Yeah.
us, I mean, as you know, the stats, like most shows are not getting over 100 downloads an episode. Most shows don't even make it past a few shows, right? And they aren't getting those kinds. Like it's rare to be in the kind of atmosphere of 10,000 plus
Oh,
downloads an
yeah.
episode. So what do we do for the rest of us? And that was
I
kind of
know.
what inspired me to think, how could I take that network model and sort of downsize it to
Yeah.
independent podcasters?
I love that. And I think like together we can achieve more. And it is harder for the smaller podcasts or solopreneurs. Like we're doing it for authority, for visibility, for relationships and business building. Like for me, I don't even care how many downloads I have. That's not my focus of my show. But having said that, I do still want exposure. And I also don't really care about the advertising part of it. But yeah, like I would never have thought, oh, join some kind of network to more collaboration, more opportunity for visibility. And yeah, because together with other like podcasts, you can achieve more impact, more reach. So I love that model.
Yeah, I'm definitely a very community over competition minded kind of person. And I think that we all do better when we help each other. There's not some mythical limited piece of pie. It's not like there's people out there saying, I will only listen to one podcast, right? And we're all fighting for
Yeah.
that person's attention. There are so many people, and people who love podcasts listen to lots of podcasts, and they're always looking for something new to be listening to. And so there's not there's no reason to view other podcasters as threats,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Instead, looking at it, I think, is like, how can we help each other? And I think the more you can get into that headspace, the better you can do in podcasting. And that's the goal behind having a collective or a network that you can be a part of.
Absolutely. So with the Feminist Podcast Collective, besides women, I'm assuming, who do you typically look for?
Well, we have not just women, just so you know,
Oh,
because
okay.
anyone can be a feminist, and we do have a
That
few
is
men.
true.
Yeah, which is great because I'm a big fan of finding men who share the values of feminism and want to be in spaces that share those values. Ultimately, our shows are all connected by one thing, which is shared values. We put the values on the website up front.
Mhm.
We are really clear about what we value, which is a lot around inclusivity, especially in the time we're in right now when DEI programs are being cut. We're the kind of people who are saying we want to do all that we can to protect equity, inclusion, diversity, creating spaces where all voices are heard. And in the podcasting space, that's really important because,
Mhm.
as we know, very often when you look at those top lists of shows, it's white man after white man after white man. It's
Right?
very hard for women, and most especially anyone of color, to get the same kind of visibility in the podcasting space as white men. And
Yeah.
so we're all the kinds of people who are really committed to saying, what does it look like to be thinking about diversity and equity in the podcasting space? That does not mean that all of our hosts are women or people of color,
Mhm.
but we do have a great number of those folks. And I'm proud of that because we want our space to reflect the world that we're wanting to create. But what matters is we're all committed to those same values. And often that looks like some of our shows actually talk about those issues, but
Hmm.
many don't.
Yeah.
But if they have guests, they're very mindful of trying to think about how do I make sure that my guest list, my guest roster is not
Right.
just one white man after another, right? Which is too often what we see, or one white woman after another. How do I make sure that my guests
Mm.
represent that diversity and equity that I care about? How can I use my message to further those things? How am I just even thinking about my business in that way? And the podcast is a
Right.
reflection of that. So that is what binds us all, is really just a shared commitment to values. Most of our shows are business shows, but not all. It's about half of the shows are
Okay.
business and marketing related. The other half, a lot of them are like society, culture, health, wellness, those sorts of topics. So it kind of runs the gamut. And ultimately, the only thing that matters is that you're an independent podcaster, that you share this commitment to wanting to create a more equitable world, and that you are collaborative minded, because we don't want people in this space who are just takers. It's about giving as
Right.
much as it is taking.
100%. And I love that idea of making sure that you are representing everyone that are out there. I happen to see some of the stats. Of course, the print for me is puny. Here we go. That and these are stats of people, the podcasts that are in your collective. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we have about 35 members, and that is the stats you're about to share are
Okay.
our collective stats as a group.
Gotcha, gotcha. So 90% identify as women, 283,000 combined social reach. That's amazing. 633,000 combined downloads. Killer. 33% identify as LGBTQ and all the rest. Sorry, there's a lot of letters there. And 31% identify as BIPOC. So, and then you've obviously got different categories for the different types of podcasts that you have. So I love that. And even just thinking about, who is marginalized, who isn't being represented, and how can we give a leg up? Because everyone's voice is important, perspective, their experience, their viewpoint. Like the more that we spread that, I just think the better as people we will become.
Agreed. And it's why, so part of our collective is having guest speakers. You were one of them, and yours was absolutely amazing. Loved everything you had to share about how to make sure you use your guesting appearances to the maximum. So I'll be following some of that advice after being a guest on your show. But we have a guest speaker come in every month and teach something to our community. And like last week, we had Chloe Wangwu, who's from Nobi Works, and her whole thing was about what does it look like to be representing or to be bringing a megaphone, using your show as a
Yeah.
platform for those historically underrecognized voices. And for our members who are folks who have historically underrecognized identities, how do they go about increasing visibility because it's really important to all of us because whatever size show you have a platform. And how do
Yeah.
you use that platform and thinking about who are the kinds of folks you're having on your show? And do they just look like you? And is it just a one week after another of people who look like you? Or are you really encouraging diverse voices, diverse experiences? Because that's going to help your reach from a practical standpoint.
Yes.
And also, it just helps know that you're creating that world that we all really, well, not all of us, but most of us want to
Yeah.
create.
Agreed. And for me personally, like I just love hearing everyone's like story of like how did you get in the podcasting industry and like who do you serve and like I could be in the exact same industry, but there's so many different perspectives. It's like I just love hearing all the different stories and what have you. So with yours then, like how does it work? Do you like I know you were saying like with when you're a collective, obviously advertisers can advertise throughout the conglomerate, so to speak, but you weren't focused yet on or at all on the advertising end of things. So what are the benefits would you say for joining a collective like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in our space, there's a few. One, as I mentioned, we have outside speakers who come in. So every
Yeah.
month, there's information being that's really, we try to do things that are really practical, usable, something you can go and use that day, right?
Yeah.
And there's this resource library that's growing of all the past
Mhm.
speakers. So, when you're in a space like that, you usually get access, and in ours specifically, there's access to great education. And that's really important if you want
Yeah.
to stay on top of what you should be doing to have either whatever your goal is, whether it's just to have better visibility or to nurture your audience that already exists or to find new leads. You need to know what you can be doing to do that. And as a small independent podcaster, that can be hard to do. There's so much out there. So having that sort of curated for you and delivered to you is a really great benefit of being a part of our group or something like it. Another thing is co-working, which we do monthly. We have a co-working session. So it's just a time to show up with other people and get work done. That's
Yeah.
probably a lesser benefit, but still a nice thing to have. But I would say the biggest benefit of any network is really the community.
Yeah.
If you're joining any sort of community space, it's really about who are you in the room with. And in our community, we have a Slack group. So that is a place where in between calls, everyone can stay in touch, ask questions. What are you doing? Can you help me with this? Do you know somebody who talks about this?
Mhm.
I had a guest canceled. Can somebody come be on my show
Ooh,
because I do
yeah.
live shows, whatever, right? So we have that space for people to do that. And then so we have weekly calls. One call's a
Oh, wow.
co-working call, one call is the guest speaker, and the other two calls every month we do sort of a mini mastermind session, and we call it our spotlight session. One show gets put in the love seat. Hot seat seems
Yeah.
too
I know.
violent. So we put them in the love seat, and the entire community puts their attention on that show and whatever it is that they're wanting to work through, whether that is a monetization thing, like how do I get sponsors? How do I find advertisers? An audience growth issue, something around content, something around like how do I use this show to actually benefit my business, right? Whatever issue that they're having, we all come and focus on that one show for the entirety of that
Ooh,
call.
nice.
And those are really beneficial for the person who's in the love seat. But because podcasting is fairly universal in a lot of ways, everyone gets
Oh,
ideas. So
totally.
everyone's leaving that call with ideas that they can apply to their own podcast as well. So there's so much benefit in being in the room. But as that person in the love seat, you're getting all of that attention. So
Yeah.
those rotate throughout the year. We're able to do,
Perfect.
24 of them a year, however many, yeah, 24
Yeah.
of them a year, and slowly work through all of our members. So there's a lot of richness in being able to have a space with people that share your values, that
Yeah.
care about the same things you do, who can answer a question, who can tell you, is that normal? Right? How often do we have as a podcaster alone going like, I feel like my numbers have dipped all of a sudden. Is everyone else
Yeah.
experiencing that? But you don't know if you don't have anyone to talk
No.
to, right? Someone who can say like, who can just celebrate with you when you land that cool guest and your partner doesn't really understand the significance and you want to tell somebody who will get it, right? So having that community to me, first and foremost, above all else, is the biggest value because podcasting is kind of lonely for most people. Most of us are solo hosts. We
Yeah.
typically don't even have a get like a co-host. Some of us do, but most of us are doing it alone. We're doing it like without an audience. We have random
Yeah.
people maybe coming on, and if you're a person who's doing solo episodes, it's even more lonely.
Oh, yeah.
So that community is just such a valuable thing to have, especially when you are new at it or you're still in that place where you're not getting a lot of numbers yet, not feeling the traction,
Yeah.
and just need the support around what to do next.
Yeah, absolutely. And people that have the same values and viewpoints or views as you do and think the same way and are dealing with the same issues, you know what I mean? And just to pick each other's
Yeah.
brain and get that feedback. So what has been some of the feedback that you've gotten, or how has it evolved since you started it?
Yeah, well, when I started, so I started this a little over a year ago, just because I was like thinking about I don't I need a space, right? And was looking for a space. I couldn't really find a great space. Didn't want to pay a lot of money to join some sort of I don't
Yeah,
know, mastermind for podcasters. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. All I knew is I kept listening to these podcasts and hearing ads for other shows and thinking like, why doesn't that exist for a podcast my size? Like that would really help.
yeah,
So I just started reaching out to podcasters I knew who shared values, and we slowly started meeting and talking about what this thing could become. And we started with 15 shows, I think, something like 12, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 12 to 15 shows, and did a quarter of it. And at that time, it was just let's get together every other week and meet, right? And
yeah.
so that's kind of how we started. Let's just get together and meet. And then we decided to add some more people in the next quarter. And then it was like, okay, I could also host a co-working session. And then somebody was like, "Could we get speakers?" So I'm like, I could ask. I started to get speakers in. So it's been evolving
Yeah,
over time to
that's
include
cool.
more people and to have the structure we have now. And this spotlight session is new this year, and those
Yeah,
have been incredibly well
I bet.
received. I definitely think it was the best shift to give our meetings more focus, more purpose, to help people really get more out of it. And I part of it too, I mentioned the spotlight session is after the week following a spotlight session, the entire community is encouraged to promote the that show that was in the spotlight to like
Ooh,
try to bring this whole collective power. You mentioned all that social
yes.
media reach that we have collectively. What does it look like if we all put our email lists or all put
Yeah.
our social media or whatever towards one show and give them a little boost? Everything is always volunteer. I'm never going to force anyone to do anything
Mhm.
that doesn't fit with their content calendar or what they have going on or their capacity. But we get a great number of people who step up and send out an email or
Yeah.
put it on social media or both or find other ways even. And we do a lot of guest swapping where we'll be on each other's shows.
Oh, nice.
We also like will run ads. So in that week following the spotlight, we a lot of us run the ad for that person's show or
Oh,
a trailer
wow.
for that show. So there's a lot of opportunities when you're working collectively to also get in front of new audiences,
Yeah.
to, have more exposure, increase your reach. Even if you're not doing outside advertising to bring in money, there's a lot of promotional opportunity there when you can get in front of someone else's show and say, "Hey, let's do an ad swap or let's do a guest swap."
Yeah,
That
yeah.
helps to expand your reach. So there are just
That's
so many
awesome.
benefits of being part of something like this. And all of those things have just been this slow evolution over the last year of
Yeah.
like getting, it's exciting to think about what else could we do?
I know. I was just going to ask you, what is your vision for the next year? Or do you have one?
Oh, I have a lot of vision.
Love
It's
it.
more about capacity to deliver on the vision.
I
So
know.
right now, this is a free organization. It would be awesome to be able to keep it that way, but I do put a lot of time
I would,
into
yeah.
it, to
Oh my
managing it, finding
goodness.
guest
And the
speakers and
amount of
organizing
value?
everything.
Yes, girl, please
Yeah,
charge.
so well, right now it's dues optional, and we have a lot of members who step up and sort of
Aw.
will monthly deliver some dues, and it's great. I get a couple $100 a month usually to help, but it's not a lot, but it's something, right? And that's a
Yeah.
start. But the visions I have are about ideally, so if anyone listens to this who is interested in sponsorship, I'm really hoping to find like a premier sponsor that
Mm.
wants to put more money towards this organization to be and have some naming rights. Like it's the Feminist Podcasters Collective brought to you by more
Totally.
company name, right? And to go out to our email list, to be able to come and talk to our podcasters, to have your name front and center on the website, for us to mention it. Some of our shows would more than willing step up and, offer those kind of ads. So that's my vision is like, could I find a premier sponsor who wants to show their commitment to equity and inclusion in the
Hmm.
podcasting space? Most especially in this time, to throw money our way to be a part of this so that we don't have to charge people. Because I mean, part of this vision of equity inclusion is not to put barriers in place. But if that doesn't work out, there is the option to maybe move towards a dues model, a low
Yeah,
price model. There's so much value that people get out of it,
I'd
that I think
say.
it's worth it anyway. So yeah, one of those two things. And then eventually, maybe figuring out what the advertising model would look like.
Yeah,
That's just difficult with the revenue sharing that would go with that and figuring out how do you break
a lot
that
of
out by
logistics.
show, right? And some shows have much larger audiences, others smaller. Do they get equal pieces
I
of the
know.
pie? Can advertisers choose which shows to advertise or not, right? So there's a lot of things that come up with that, which is why that's farther down the road. But at some point,
I
that's
don't blame
another
you.
option worth
Yeah.
exploring. But right now, I'm really focused on growing the membership, to find more of the right
Mm,
aligned, values aligned kind of people, and then looking for doing the early work on trying to find a sponsor.
yeah. I love that. Good goals to have for the future. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
love, I just can't believe how much value you bring. Like that's crazy to me.
Oh, thank
That's so
you.
much.
I
It's so good.
I love it.
So for other,
I love building community spaces and
yes.
ones that I want for myself. And so, like, there is a lot of value. And also, this is what can kind of bite me because I'll be like, but I get all of the value out of it too. But I do have to remember it is a lot of my time. But
Yeah, yeah.
I love being in, it was a need I saw that I
Yeah.
wanted filled.
That's it,
And then
right?
being able to fill it for myself. And then the awesome benefit
Yeah.
is it also fills that need for a lot of other people.
Yeah, and when you're filling your cup and it like sparks you with joy and happiness and you look forward to it, it's like it doesn't feel like a task that you need to do and so on
Right.
and
A
so forth.
chore.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are in their business in general are looking to build communities and want to have that sense of fulfilling audience that is working with you and connected. What tips would you give for those that are trying to build a community? Because clearly, A, your energy is like, I feel like that just all comes naturally to you. But I mean, it does take intentional pieces to keep that community together. What tips would you give?
Well, I think first and foremost is thinking about capacity and what is involved, like the workload involved, and is that something that you can sustain over time by
Right.
yourself, or do you need support? Because I think too often we rush into creating community things because it sounds exciting or
Uh-huh.
potentially there's a money maker in it or whatever it is, and we kind of run into it without really thinking it through and like how much work is this actually going to be? And can I sustain that month over month? Because once we
Yeah.
start to build community spaces, people start to have expectations. You're supposed to have this meeting every week. You're supposed to get
Mm.
this, like, I'm supposed to find a speaker every month. There are responsibilities that I've taken on, and there are expectations for those things. Even if people aren't charging, I still feel, or aren't paying, I still feel an obligation to deliver on a promise I've made. And I don't want to make that promise like in a month where I'm feeling great, and then 3 months later be like,
I
oh, I can't keep
know.
this up. So I really think you need to map out exactly what you're talking about and not just holding a session once a month, but what does that mean? Like what's actually involved? Do I have to set up an event in the calendar? Do I have to send email
Mm.
reminders? Do I have to find somebody to record, or do I have to edit a recording? Do I have to upload a recording somewhere to make it available? Whatever. Really think through all the steps and
Logistics.
write it all down before you ever start building a community. Get really, really honest with yourself about what's involved. But if you do all that and you're like, yeah, I'm so excited. I have the capacity. I know I can do this. The next thing I would think about is those values because it's so, so important. Whatever your value set is, whatever's important to you, it doesn't have to be the same as what's important to me, but
Mm.
knowing what matters most to you and the people you will be sharing a space with is so important because if you start inviting everyone in and you're the person responsible for managing the community, if you haven't thought through what are the shared values of this community and the shared sort of rules of the space,
Yeah,
you can have bedlam, right? It can so quickly turn into people fighting, people feeling disrespected,
I know.
and you're having, I mean, honestly, it can feel like you're like dealing with toddlers if you're not
Babysitting.
careful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't want that to happen, it's really important for you to know, as the person who's leading the space, what is the value set of the space? It's yours. You get to decide what are the rules and making sure that everyone knows and agrees to those before they enter. So when anyone applies to be a part of our space, I usually meet with people first. I've only had a
Oh,
few
okay.
people who've ever applied without me meeting them first. So ordinarily, I will get on a call with someone. We kind of get a feel for each other, make sure it feels right. I talk about what happens, the value set, all of that. But even if they've met with me, they have to go through a set of commitments that outline very specifically the expectations, our values, the expectations for how they'll show up, what the kind of rules, community guidelines are, and they have to agree to all of those things so that I have that. And it also talks about what it looks like if you don't, or if something
Mm,
happens, how are those things handled? So think that part through so that it
smart.
doesn't later hurt you when you're in a room full of people who don't get along or aren't agreeing about how to behave. So I think values are really important. And then I also just think about what is your mission? Like, what is it you're trying to accomplish? What is the the lighthouse that's guiding what you're doing? Because if you don't really have a reason, first of all, you need to know what the reason is for the space,
Hmm.
what people get from it so that they understand why they want to be a part of it. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, it's a real hard sell, even if it's free. If people don't understand what the point is, what they're going to get out
Yes.
of it, they're not going to show up or why we're here. You need to be really clear about that. It also helps with guiding those decisions in the future. So in my case, I could have said, let's get to advertising right away, but money was not the primary mission for this organization. It was about community first and foremost. So advertising then becomes really low on the priority list for me. So as I go thinking about what comes next, it's really easy for me to decide what comes next because I know what our values are and what we're trying to accomplish here. So I think those would be the things I would think about as you start to think about bringing together community.
That was very comprehensive
Oh,
and
good. Sorry.
very helpful. No, in
Good.
a
Okay.
good way. Yeah, absolutely. Because really, you think about even people starting Facebook groups, they start it up, and then, like you said, it's chaos, or they just can't keep it up, and then they bail. Like it's,
Yeah.
you
And then they
can't.
also wonder why no one's interacting or why there's no engagement. And if you didn't come into it with the clarity of like, what's the reason to be here? What are we doing? Then there's no way you're able to communicate that. And people don't understand why they're there. And then even if
Mhm.
they do understand, if they're not sure how to engage, like what's allowed, people, I
Yeah.
know sometimes we think about rules as like a limiting thing or a bad thing, but the truth is, I mean, just like children, we actually most people crave
Yeah.
rules. We want to know the boundaries in which we're
Yes.
operating so we know how to show up. Because when we don't know, I've seen that in Facebook groups, especially where people just don't talk because they're afraid. They don't want to
Yeah.
get in
I don't want to do
trouble,
the wrong thing. I don't want to get my
right?
post banned. I don't want to, like, they're like,
Yeah, and I don't
oh,
want them
no.
to be mad at me, whatever. So, like, that's why we need those rules so that we know how to operate and it makes us feel much more comfortable about participating.
100%. And I love how you brought up the expectations that it's like an agreement, if you will, because you do want a certain rules of engagement. Just because you behave in a certain way and have certain standards and, behaviors, you can't just think, oh, other people are going to be the same way because they're not.
Right.
And because you want everyone to get the most out of it, you don't want someone that's not pulling their weight. You don't want someone that, like you said, is a taker, or it kind of upsets the apple cart and then everyone leaves.
Well, and it can be really helpful to have things in place to monitor all of that too. So we have our calls, they have to check in. We have a little roll call sheet and you check in on when you've been on calls and the rules, and I use air quotes because it's not like anything set in stone. I am not the kind of person who's like, you missed a call, you have to leave. But it helps us know, like, generally,
Mhm.
we want to make sure you're giving as much as you're taking and that
Yeah,
you're showing up, right? Because what's the point if you're not
I know.
committed?
Why?
And so we use that as a rough guideline for me to then be able to go back and check in and say, hey, I've noticed that you haven't made any calls this quarter. Or, hey, I noticed you missed, you were only able to come to one call this quarter. And this is what I do each quarter, because everyone knows it's kind of a quarterly commitment.
Yeah.
Each quarter, I check back in and I say, for the people
Smart.
who've made every meeting, great, thank you. So glad you're still here. You still want to continue. Those people always say yes. But the people who are like, maybe haven't been able to make as many calls, I check in. Are you
Yeah.
still in? What's going on? Do you want to
Yeah.
pause your membership? Because I offer them to take a 1 quarter pause where they're still getting all the emails, they're still learning about everything, they have access to everything, but they just can't make the calls for a little while,
Yeah.
right? And it's an easier way than saying I quit and I leave and I have to remove them from everything. But I give everyone that opportunity, and the people in the community know the guidelines so well, they understand all of it that often they'll reach out to me first and say, I know I haven't been able to make it to a bunch of calls. Here's what's
Aw.
on. I still really want to be a part of this. Or others who will say, like, I respect this community so much and what you're doing, and I know I don't have capacity right now, so I'm going to exit because of that, because I want to respect
Yeah.
guidelines. But if you don't have things in place to be checking for
Yes.
that, systems to make sure you're checking in on people, if you're
Mhm.
not communicating those things, then that's where things go off the rails.
Yeah. Well, that to me, all that shows how great of a leader you are and the
Well, thank
touch
you.
points that you're giving with the members and how important they are to you, that they're giving that love and respect back. Some people don't have those leadership skills or people management
Yeah.
skills. So I think it's important too to do that self-reflection of like, is it built in your DNA or can you learn those skills, to be a leader, to lead a group? Because some people aren't comfortable with that or just don't have that skill set.
And not everyone has to,
Yeah,
right? Like that's where
100%.
you join. And there's such benefit to being the person who's like, I just get to show up,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like Becky or whoever is managing all of this, I just have to look at the calendar and come to the calls when I can, right? Like it's
Yeah,
so much easier to be the person who's showing up. But for some of us, probably type A people, I don't know. We don't like that. I don't want to just show up. I want to be the one who
I
decided
know.
when, right? So if you're good at that and you like that, then do it. But also if you're not, be honest with yourself. Going back to that
Mhm,
honest self-assessment about capacity, you're right. The other piece of that is, am I the right person to do this? And if
mhm.
you're not, then maybe there are so many things out there. We don't always have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah,
There's so much out there if you search for it. I mean, and if you share our value set around equity and inclusion, go to feministpodcasterscollective.com and there's a place on there where it says contact and you can, fill out a form to have a conversation with me about joining. But even if it's not our space, there are others out there as well. So go searching for podcast networks and find one that's already doing what you want so you don't have to reinvent it.
yeah, absolutely. And like you said, like as a podcaster, sometimes we can feel like this little silo that's floating around out here.
Yeah.
But just to be able to have a community to grow, to connect with, to not feel so alone, to get the support that you need without joining, like a $2,000 a month mastermind for podcasters or whatever. They're great too and have their space.
Mhm.
But sometimes for those that are starting out or again, solopreneurs new to podcasting, yeah, you need that leg up.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think when I hear from my members, far and away the most important piece of all of it for them is the community.
Yeah,
There are certain elements that they like better than others, or that they more, take advantage of more than others, like all of the things that we do. But the reason they're there is the community. It is
yeah.
so podcasting does not feel so lonely
Mhm.
because it does. I did it for years alone and was constantly racked with these questions of like, oh my
Self-doubt.
God, yeah, am I doing it all wrong? Like, why is no one listening? And then just being in spaces with people who open up and get honest and say, here's how many podcast
Yeah,
downloads I get is so huge because you're like, oh, I thought it was only me who only got,
yeah,
50 an episode. And to hear that there's other people who are doing it, right? Or I thought I was the only one spending this much money and not making any money, or like whatever it is.
whatever it
It
is.
just
Yeah,
is so helpful to know that you're not alone. So community really matters. Find whatever it is you're doing, whether it's podcasting or something else, like it's always better in community. So find community spaces where you don't have to be alone in these things.
100%. I almost feel like in this, lack of better terms, day and age, like there
Mhm.
used to be like subscriptions, memberships, where you go on a portal and you get all these things. But I feel like it's leaning away from that with like mastermind communities, like those relationships and seeking that support. Like it is growing because we just need it so much. No matter who you are, no matter what level you are in your podcast or business, we all need it to some degree.
Well, yeah, because I mean, we live in an information age where any of us can just pull out our phone and
Yeah,
get any answer to any question about
yeah,
podcasting. We can turn to ChatGPT and have it write every show
I
note or
know.
whatever. Like, there are so many resources for information. So, like, we don't really need any more courses. We don't need
No.
more checklists and whatever. Although I do think it's nice having a curated educational
Yeah,
opportunities available. But I think ultimately what most of us need, it's like we actually know what to do. We just need the people there saying, almost signing the permission slip for us to do it,
yeah,
or saying, like, you're not alone, let's do this together, because it
yeah,
makes it all so much less scary and feels more accessible.
yeah.
And really, that's almost in almost all things, that's what we need. We just need other people
No,
there with us as we do the thing because we have the information.
yeah,
It's the like going it alone part that's what makes it usually feel more scary.
yeah, 100%. Well, thank you for doing what you're doing, for starting the podcast collective. I think it's fabulous, and you give obviously all of your heart and time and love to it. And I bet your members adore the heck out of you and are so grateful for you. So, yeah,
I hope.
happy to share the word about the podcast, Feminine Podcast Collective dot
Feminist
com, right?
Feminist Podcasters Collective.com. Yes. Or you can go to feministpods.com, which was
Ooh,
also available. So I bought that. So
good
yeah,
call.
either one, feministpods.com or
Yeah,
feministpodcasterscollective.com. And you can come check us out. Even if you're not interested in joining, come check out our shows. We have an email list. You can
yeah.
also sign up for our email list to find out about the kinds of things that we're doing with our shows. If you're interested in sponsorship or joining, you can go to the contact
Mhm.
section on the website and there's
Great.
information on how to get a hold of us for that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me today and sharing, yeah, how people can find a good community and do more together. Love it.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we'll see you folks next week for another episode of the Leverage Your Podcast Show.